I'm joined once again by my friend who is unfortunately living in exile, former Ukrainian diplomat, Andrii Telizhenko. Andrei, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Jason, thank you for having me back on. It's always a great pleasure and honor to be on your show.
It's good to see you, Andrei. You're looking well. People who have seen you before on the show know that you worked in the Ukrainian embassy in Washington, D.C. for many, many years. You were approached by members of the Democratic Party, DNC operatives, who wanted you to participate in a plan to drum up dirt, claiming that Donald Trump was a Russian spy, all kinds of intrigue. And you, of course, have been sanctioned, thrown out of the country. Why don't you just give everybody a little bit of background, and then we'll go into talking about what's been happening lately with Laura Loomer. And I'd love to hear your opinion on that, any questions that you might have for Laura. I hope she'll see the conversation that you and I are about to have and hopefully respond.
Yeah, I call her the new Gene Anderson. You know that the Georgia Peach. So that's unfortunately, historically, it was the American who worked for the Nazi Germany. Now the new American woman working podcaster today working for the Nazi regime in Kiev. So unfortunately, that is the case. It's heartbreaking. But to your question, yeah, I'm a former Ukrainian government official. AI writes me as a low-ranking diplomat, whatever. I don't care. But I used to work at the Ukrainian Embassy in Washington D.C. Uh, Before that, I was advisor to the Prosecutor General of Ukraine, and before that, I was a senior policy advisor to the first Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine on intel, law enforcement, and military. So, long path throughout these last 10 years, but I resigned from the Ukrainian government. I did not want to support what they were doing, how they were interacting with the Democratic Party, the DNC, which approached me, and I personally witnessed not just that approachment by the Chalupa woman, Alexandra Chalupa, and which I testified under oath to the Federal Election Commission. I was subpoenaed and I testified, I gave evidence, and they had to hire lawyers. So it was all full business, just not just my words up in the media, but it was officially. And testified to the United States Senate behind not on open doors, but gave them evidence and provided information which was used in their report by Senator Johnson, Senator Grassley on the Bidens and their involvement in Ukraine, which I witnessed, and the corruption that was happening there. So yeah, I got smeared in the media by everybody you can imagine online throughout those last years, starting from 2017 when I went public and called me a Russian agent, Russian bot, and then labeled me through the State Department and the Treasury that I am a Russian agent connected to Russian agents, KGB, FSB, whatever, I don't know, aliens, anything you can imagine that I'm connected to. That's they connect me for election interference, which I testified to officially governed body of the United States. So here I am. I'm sanctioned today. Cannot enter the United States. Cannot do banking transactions. Cannot travel freely. My life is in danger. I was put on the kill list in Ukraine for being a so-called Russian agent and labeled by the Treasury as a Russian agent, and had to flee Ukraine, not because of the war itself, but because of having a mark on my back for testifying and telling the truth on Ukraine's involvement and the deep state's involvement with the U.S. elections against President Donald Trump. Uh, and I paid a price for that.
Well,
And
let me just pause you for a second. You are in your own country. If you were to enter, in danger of being obviously murdered, you're on the kill list. What's the name of that kill list in Ukraine?
Mirotvorets. It's actually on a U.S. government server located. Some say the Pentagon, some say Virginia, the CIA. So it's located on a government server, and people who are placed on a kill list, they're politicians from all over the globe. And when you get killed, they actually write your name off and say eliminated. So this is basically the list that you're in. So if I would come back to Ukraine, if I would want to come back to Ukraine, I would be shot right at the border, which I said I had to flee Ukraine when the war started because my name and my home address was put on media and throughout Facebook and social media, so people could find me and shoot me on on how they wanted to, and even the security forces of Ukraine were after me. So I had to basically learn my way out of the country, my own country, my homeland, which I came back from studying abroad for years and years, and then started working in government and did not support the government's position on their involvement in U.S. elections and politics and how they interfered, and resigned, and then start speaking the truth. And now, as I said, put on a kill list, have a mark on my back, and that's who I am. I'm Andrii
It's an
Telizhenko.
unbelievable
Some call me
story.
whistleblower, some call me former diplomat. So
Yeah, I mean, they smear you. We see that. I mean, this is a truly shocking story. So let me bring you up to today. How do you feel when you see Laura Loomer suddenly? First, I want to ask you a question. I mean, I know you won't necessarily have the answer to this, but your experience in Ukrainian government might help people understand. This is obviously the presidential palace. Laura Loomer is not a U.S. ambassador. She's not a military envoy, as far as we know. She's not a senator. She's not specially appointed by Donald Trump, as far as we know. She's a civilian. She's a U.S., essentially a tourist. Granted, she's got 2 million people following her on Twitter. What do you think about the likelihood of someone just showing up in Ukraine, doing broadcasts on the internet, and as she has basically led everyone to believe, just being invited by the president in the middle of a war to sit here and talk to? I mean, it doesn't seem very plausible to me on its face.
no, it's not. You cannot get a hold of Zelensky easily if you would want to. I have a cell phone number and it's here, Max, but I don't know if they'll pick up. As I said,
Who's
I'm just
this?
saying overall, you would not have a hold of people like that. And the problem with the way she did it. There's one thing coming in and doing questions toward a leader of a country, or the leader of a regime, even though Zelensky, by the constitution of the country itself, Ukraine, Laura Loomer should read the Constitution of Ukraine, at least understanding the laws, what is happening there. And Article 110, Constitution of Ukraine, the president of Ukraine is there for 4 years. He cannot be any longer. He then has to give his power to the parliament or have re-elections or change the Constitution. He could have changed the Constitution, prolonged his capabilities, and then stayed in power and be legitimate. He didn't do any of those things. He still says that he's the leader of the free world or whatever it is they call it, and lures around the globe begging for money, weapons, and missiles, and whatever else that he's begging for, and selling those weapons afterwards to
Drones?
cartels. And we had drones, but he's selling everything afterwards and making money on it. So Laura Loomer should have, first of all, understand if she would have done it professionally. Like, for example, we have an example of Tucker Carlson. People are criticizing him, but he came in, he did interviews with different leaders of the world, the country, you like it or not, but he talked to them, and then it was interesting to listen. I didn't listen to her interview even with Zelensky because it's of like I just heard pieces of it and it was enough for me because it was total nonsense. It was unprofessional. It was a show just for the public, and then she
Well,
continued on
let
ramping
let me
throughout the
drill into that.
country, the
Let me
military.
let me drill into that with you. What did you feel was unprofessional about it? I mean, I share your concerns. I didn't hear her ask him when the next election was going to be. I didn't hear her ask him about your predicament. I didn't hear her ask him anything about Alexandra Chalupa. I didn't hear her say anything about Alexander Dubinsky. Isn't this a former member of parliament in Ukraine who's been imprisoned?
Yeah, Dubinsky is imprisoned by Zelensky. Yeah, and he's now, I think he was sent to from jail to a prison cell. So yeah, she didn't ask anything about the opposition. She didn't ask anything about the professionalism of this. That's what I'm going to. And she sat down with Zelensky. She learned around Ukraine overall afterwards, promoting the war, the drones, the not the peace process, promoting Nazis, which she said Ukraine doesn't have, because she spoke to some rabbis, the Asman, one of the rabbis, and he told her there are no Nazis, even though the rabbi himself is promoting all these Nazis and giving them medals throughout the country and lobbying for them in the United States, she did not talk to the regular people. She did not go onto the street and go and not to downtown Ukraine and talk to the VIPs of this regime who are not fighting. These guys did not fight. They're in the background making millions of dollars. That's why they're still alive, looking pretty well. I know the Azov Battalion personally myself because we all used to oversee the security service of Ukraine. That's the intel office of the Ukrainian of Ukraine, and we had files on all the Azov Battalion and the other dozens of Nazi groups that are there,
Wow.
and they are all coordinated by the security service of Ukraine, by not just the security service of Ukraine, by the CIA and MI6,
So
and they
this
all are
guy,
being. We actually raided them in
Biletsky,
2014.
this guy.
The, yeah, we raided his office where he trained teenagers, 13, 14, 15-year-old boys. They taught them Mein Kampf. They had Hitler posters behind their backs. We had the security service of Ukraine actually, not that they didn't want to raid, so we had the police raid them on the behest of the German government saying you should stop these guys because they are Nazis. That's the words from the German ambassador to Ukraine at that time. And we actually, what we saw was just horrifying. And we had files on these people. So it's not just a PR image or somebody saying because they have some badge on their patch to their uniform. It's real like propaganda of Nazis. Yeah, that's the awesome guy I'm talking about.
Let me
He's
let me add
promoting
one
and
thing, if
giving.
I can, Andre, because a lot of people may not know historically. I don't know this rabbi. I don't know anything about him, but in World War II, there were a list that Hitler kept of people called noble Jews who were Jews who, in fact, kind of got a free ride from the Nazis, some of which even worked for the Nazis. There was a Reich minister named Albert Rosenberg, I believe. And the point is, just because someone says, "Oh, I'm Jewish," and I say there are no Nazis, it doesn't. I agree with you. It doesn't mean there are none. It's kind of like an old trick of the Nazis to keep a couple Jews around who, there are psychopaths of all religions.
Of course, there's ugly people all around, and Christians have them, Jews have them, Muslims have them. Everybody has crazy people in their society. So you have to understand that you cannot just take a word of because some rabbi told you. He's one of the top rabbis in Ukraine. The problem is Laura Loomer didn't ask why is the Christian church being punished and pressured by the torn apart and destroyed by the Zelensky regime? Why did not this rabbi did not support or block the destruction of the Christianity in Ukraine? He actually learned for it, and he clapped his hands when the one of the largest monasteries, where Laura Loomer said the Russians hit allegedly from her words directly because they wanted to destroy the church, even though, as I said, I'm not trying to protect anybody. There's bridges standing in between Kiev and in downtown Kiev, which connected right in what east bank of Ukraine, and it's right in downtown Kiev. They're all still standing, but allegedly the Russians wanted to hit this church, and she promoted that as it was a direct act against it. But she didn't ask why did Zelensky block it and close down the church, and you cannot actually go and visit it openly because it's one of the historical monuments. It's more than it's a couple of hundred years old, and that's where Christianity in the Kiev Rus was born long, long, long ago, thousand a year ago. So this is the question she didn't ask. She didn't ask the right question. She didn't ask what is happening in Ukraine for real. Should I change my views on Ukraine because the truth is not there, or something is true, and I was told not the truth, but she didn't ask those questions. She just came in with an agenda saying, oh, or before even talking to Zelensky, I know that I was lied about Ukraine, and this is what I'm gonna tell you now. That's the fact. She even came there promoting this war, promoting the Zelensky regime. That's why I have information, and I started asking people what is happening in the country. Why is Laura Loomer there? Like, what changed her mind? Because I don't believe that people can change their minds within a day. I changed my mind within a couple of years, understanding what happened in Ukraine and the West and etc. with Russia. She changed her mind in a couple of weeks. And from what was told, she got received, some say 1 million, some say two, some say up to $5 million, and her team to promote Zelensky, his regime, to push this agenda. And that's why I call her Jane Anderson. She's there for the money. She's
Well,
there
we don't.
promoting this
I
because
don't disagree with you that that's probable, but I don't personally have any evidence that Laura. I
I
mean,
don't too.
I
I'm just
believe you're
telling what I
right.
was told
Yeah.
from people
No, I
within inner
know Laura
circles in the Kiev.
personally, and I do not know her to do things that are not directly benefiting her. So I do agree that she was somehow compensated to be there. That's my opinion. I'd like to see some evidence. She's been very careful to say that the Ukrainian government didn't pay her, but that doesn't necessarily rule out some military contracting company, some outside agency, someone paying her. Even if she wasn't paid at all, she's certainly raised her profile by doing this. She's been all over the news for the past 2 weeks. This guy is really somebody interesting to speak to. I don't, she's sitting here. This guy is a Nazi. You're saying you surveilled him and invaded his office and everything. How could Laura just sit here and talk to this guy and he says, I'm not a Nazi and that's it? She doesn't probe any deeper?
Because she doesn't know, she was not told to do that. She was told to do the opposite. She
Yeah,
was not paid by the government of Zelensky personally. She was paid by the people around Zelensky,
right.
people within the, for example, there's rumors Akhmetov. I believe there's other oligarchs like Butkevich are involved who gave money into this project and pushed this agenda through. So it wasn't like Laura Loomer comes in and cash was given. It doesn't work this way. It was given to third parties and transferred that money, maybe cash, Bitcoin, whatever. You cannot transfer now. It's hard to find these things in today's world, but it was not done directly by Zelensky person because he likes Laura Loomer. He probably doesn't know who she was before he met her.
Right.
So,
So
and
Akhmetov, he's an oligarch in charge of this DTEK or whatever it is, this energy company. Is that right?
one of the companies, yeah, Detect is one of his companies that he owns. He's a multi-billionaire in Ukraine. He was the coordinator and basically controlled Donbass for a long, long time. He killed people, like hired to kill people in the 90s. So he's like a former mafia head in Ukraine. And then he basically made tons of money and lured himself under the British intelligence, where he has an apartment in downtown London for a couple $1 million. He has a villa in south of France. He has a villa in Monaco for $500 million that he just bought, one of the largest real estate operations within the last decade. So this is who Akhmedov is. He's a pretty financed guy, and he actually is one of the people who actually under Yanukovych. He used to be Yanukovych's aide, the former president of Ukraine, who had to flee to Russia because of the coup, was financing and paying money to Paul Manafort under Yanukovych. So he does. So this is how it works. It doesn't go directly from people at the top, and so unfortunately, I have information that. I don't know, no evidence on hand, but information from people within Zelensky's circle. That's how it happened, and that's why Laura Loomer has an agenda to tell the lies. I'm not going to tell her background where she went through. Maybe the woman went through a lot and she wants to make for it. It's not for us to judge, but for me, it's to judge. I don't. I take it personally. If you go to my country and you lie about it, when I came to the U.S., I didn't lie. I came to the U.S. with the truth on what happened within Ukraine and the United States and the deep state, and I was willing to go to testify on it. She comes to my country when it's in the verge of war, more than 2 million Ukrainian soldiers dead, and Russians, and people are just dying. She should go to the villages where there are no men. She should go to the streets and see how the men are being dragged like dogs from the street. She doesn't. She's not going to show you that.
Yeah.
If she did show that, I would have no problem. She stood one side. She shows Zelensky, but then she comes to not just Zelensky, but to the Nazis, where she says there's no Nazis, and she promotes them on media, and doesn't ask the right questions to even them, asking what is their beliefs, what the reality. They're not going to answer the truth to them because it's all a show. It's a show for the media in the West.
Yeah.
It's a show
Now,
for the people in the West to close their eyes and continue to support Ukraine and say, "Oh, this is what's happening." It's a show that if before the midterms to have the Republican vote and say we need to come back Ukraine and continue this war because there was a promise from the President of the United States, Donald Trump, to stop the war in Ukraine. And they cannot do it because the United States doesn't want to leave Ukraine. So they had Laura Loomer, and they agreed to that. Even money paid from one side, they had agreement to push this narrative and say, we're going to have her in and maybe change the minds of some Republicans and hardcore former MAGA or MAGA people in the United States and say we can push this idea and see how it works. So this is what's being done, unfortunately, here. It's
Yeah.
not the stopping of the war. It's not because I'm furious she's promoting Zelensky. I don't care about Zelensky. He's a done man. He's done. He's finished. He destroyed my country. I don't listen to what he's saying because whatever he says, he's a puppet of the West, of the deep state. But promoting Nazism, promoting saying that Ukraine is okay and everything's hunky dory in Ukraine and nobody's dying because of the government. The government is killing people. People are suffering because they cannot support themselves in Ukraine, and that's the reality. That's why I'm furious of Laura Loomer's lies on my country. She's lying to what she's doing, and she's actually doing real propaganda now, not what she was doing before. She was actually saying some truth before. Now it's just there's no truth at all to it. That's the problem.
Yeah, I agree with you, Andre. I mean, as I've said, I know Laura personally, and certainly there was a time that I considered her a friend, but I think what she's done here is extremely dangerous and misleading, and I think she needs to be honest with the people of Ukraine, the people of the United States. If she has been paid or otherwise influenced by some group to do this, I think that needs to be known. I also find the timing very suspicious, not only having to do with the midterm elections in the United States, but it was very closely timed with this meeting of Zelensky with Donald Trump. And I think people who know who Laura Loomer is know that she's a personal friend of Trump. It's just come out in the news the other day that Zelensky asked Trump to ask Elon Musk to open up access to Starlink satellites within Russia to, I presume, allow the operation of these long-range drones deep into Russia. And we've just heard earlier today there was an explosion in Moscow. So, I mean, again, as you're saying, I think the United States becoming involved in this war. Look, I don't want Ukraine to be destroyed. I'm sympathetic to the people of Ukraine. I want this war to end, and I want the United States to not be meddling in it. I think it's a tragedy what's happened in Ukraine, but the point is, the war needs to end, and it would have ended a long time ago if it wasn't for the United Kingdom, the United States, and NATO interfering and doing all the things that we've been doing. And Laura's now become a part of that.
That's the problem. Foreign interference in Ukraine's politics, starting from 2014, the involvement starting from the civil war in Donbass.
Let's talk
I
about
was
that, Andre, because you were there on the ground. And when Laura spoke to this guy, Beletsky, or whatever his name is, he was talking about his version of the story of how the war began. And I found it very notable that he didn't say anything about the Euromaidan, the fires in that government building, the snipers. What is it that really happened there that Laura missed in this conversation with this guy?
Look, not just the fire and what happened during the coup in Maidan, it was happened the last weeks of Maidan before the whole bloodshed was spilled forward. In Western Ukraine, people started to gather and start storming military facilities, security service of Ukraine facilities, the police stations, and stealing weapons. That's what started to happen. A real coup, not just a protest, peaceful protest on the street where people gathered and then sang songs. No, it was a total prepared operation within the with the help of the United States. I was there seeing how it started and how it unfolded. This was not told in the West. And then when the people in Donbass asked so we can keep their language, Russian, which they speak, and mostly 99% of Ukrainians understand Russian, and more than 75% of Ukrainians speak Russian, or they can speak Russian. So, and this is historically, we were part of Russia, and we just got its independence in 1991. And before that, for 300 years, we were part of the Russian Empire. And before that, we were one. The Rus was formed 1,000 years ago. It was one nation with the Russians, which are today. So it was the Rus people. So it was all interconnected. And then it just this somebody said, "Oh, the Western Ukrainian people are better. We should listen to them," even though they did uh, take over government buildings and did do a coup. And then the people in the East, when they said, "We just want to keep our Russian language and our faith and our history," they were told no. And I was there, as I said, as you said, and I gave a good interview to Aron Mate. It came out a couple of years ago, where I give them details on how it unfolded. Where the director of CIA, Brennan, at that time, I was in that meeting, not as a translator, but as a part of the meeting and helping organize it for the Ukrainian US government, told the acting president at the time, Tuchinov, to start hellfire on the people of Donbass because they're Russian. And that's with the help of the United States, this war and the coup and the war started. So Laura Loomer, not knowing, as I said, she should have done at least background. If I said, if she did background, if she came to this with at least prepared understanding, given the right questions, which she didn't, or she maybe didn't want to, then it would be professionals, at least understanding that she doing her job as a podcaster or a journalist or whatever. But she didn't do that. She just came there to promote one-sided story, and that is it. Which, as I said, just terrible that this happened. And unfortunately, as I said, this war unfolded with the help of the West. This war is still happening today with the help of the West, and we could have managed and decided Ukraine, if it was sovereign and independent and a state, it would have ended this war with Russia years ago, or it would never started because Ukraine, understanding you were being in the government, that we would have taken the Minsk Accords, which were signed and said that the Donbass would be an autonomy to Ukraine and be part of Ukraine, but be an autonomy region. And we would have Donbass, we would not have to stop the civil war, which took away more than 15,000 civilians in eastern Ukraine, which the Ukrainian army shelled for 8 years. And Laura Loomer didn't ask that question: how many people died in the war in eastern Ukraine, what happened really, and how it unfolded. And this war would have never started today with Russia. It's
Let
a
me
big
stop
war.
you there because that's very important what you're saying, that this war would never have started. This is what I'm saying. Americans going to Ukraine in the exact same way that Laura Loomer is and sticking their noses into Ukrainian and Russian business. That is what created this war. I was shocked at Laura Loomer. I don't think she knows this history, where in 2005, senators on a delegation, Richard Lugar and young Senator Barack Obama at the time, were detained by Russian officials. They were going around to former Soviet republics. Now, 2005 was a much different time. You're talking 10, 12 years after perestroika. The former Soviet Union was still in financial ruin. And these guys were going around establishing intelligence contacts. We don't really know what they were doing, but a spokesman for Obama confirmed the plane's arrival in Ukraine. So they were stoking chaos and madness all the way back then. And I mean, this is really a history that we need to know more about. I'm very bothered by this, Andrii.
And it came even before Senator Lugar, who actually I personally knew when he was still alive. I met him when I was studying in the United States in 2010, 2009. I personally spoke about issues in Ukraine, and where he was the head of foreign relations committee, I believe so at that time. And it started long before their visit. It started in 1993, and where the Soros Group, the Renaissance Foundation,
Right.
where themselves in
Bill
Ukraine
Browder.
started Bill Browder pushing narratives in Ukraine society, saying that you are better than the Russians. The Russians were your enemy for a long, long time. That they were not listened to in the first 10 years after Ukraine got its independence, because people still remembered the real history. And even though it was a total disaster, economical, people did not support their ideas. But then after the first Maidan, the first coup, the Orange Revolution, it started to change when they had their President Yushchenko with his wife, former CIA operative, will learn Ukraine and controlling Ukraine, and basically changing the Ukrainian deep state, filtering out with pro-American or American allies or spies, even with the security service of Ukraine, and embezzling them within. That's when it started to change after 2004. And it started to ramp up pretty fast. And I remember those times when there were people talking, saying, "Oh, the first coup did not bring the best results because there was no bloodshed." And then they had the second coup, there was bloodshed. So it was all pre-prepared. Ukraine elites sold out to the American deep state because they wanted to keep their dollars abroad in Switzerland and United States banks and not be sanctioned. And they did not fight for their sovereignty. That's why we're seeing today what we are seeing. And people like Yushchenko sold out, and the whole elite structure started to sell out. Their problem was when Yanukovych came in and he started to play in between. People say he's pro-Russian, but he actually he was in between Russia and the West and trying to blur things out. The problem, he wasn't like intelligent enough to play this geopolitical chess game. That's why he got lured out. And actually, if he would have stayed, there would be no war in Ukraine and no civil outbreak. The Maidan would just cool down and people go with their lives. Because the time when he was president, Ukraine had a better economy. Ukraine was full, intact with Crimea and Donbass. Ukraine was a civil country. It was, as I said, the dollar was 5 hryvnias. It was the example of hryvnia as its local currency. So now $1 is like 45 hryvnias, and it's even more than that. But people, it's being held by the foreign donors and the World Bank because the inflation is staggering in the country. You cannot buy things. People cannot afford things. The apartments are selling for cheap because people just wanted to get some money and leave the country and pay uh, just pay out to the military and just leave the country so they can give a bribe and they can cross the border. So this is what's happened. There's no men. The country was under Yanukovych was 35 million Ukrainians living, 35, 37 million. Now it's less than 20, around 15 million. Out of that 15 million, there's 3.5 million men who are still alive in the country, still today hiding from the conscription officers. And they're being lured out like pigs and dogs on the street and thrown at the front lines without any training. Laura Loomer should go and see those conscription offices. They should go and see how the people are fighting on the outskirts of Kiev, how people are fighting out those conscription officers all around, not just in Kiev, but all over the country. Go to villages where there's no men. And that's not because of the war with Russia, it's because the government of Ukraine did not protect its people and stop this war. Knowing you cannot win a nuclear country like Russia, which has the population of 150 million, first of all, has a strong army, which did not take any loan throughout these last 5 years, even having more than like 20,000 sanctions imposed on them. They still have an economy which is thriving. They did not take any foreign loan. They're still supporting everything on themselves. A lot of them are saying that Russia is being supported by Iran. Iran did give technology drones at the beginning of the conflict with Ukraine. The called Shaheds, the drones they use right now, the war with the United States. But now Russia is producing their own. They're not using anything from Iran at all for the last 4 years. So everything is being done on their own. Ukraine is taking everything from outside.
And
That
you
is the
know,
problem. You cannot win this war if you don't want to have the people to fight. You don't want the people don't want to fight. The real people of Ukraine don't want to fight.
right.
They understand this war is not for them. They're going to lose more and more. They just want to live their lives to get their lives back. That's what we're talking about,
And
and
you know,
that's what
to
Loomer should
address
go and ask those people.
to address your point about Iran, Laura made a really inflammatory statement where she said if she were the president of the United States, she would kill Putin on the basis that Iran is helping Russia or Russia is helping Iran. I don't like the idea of Russia and Iran working together. I certainly don't like anyone working to kill Americans or American military people. But when you look at this from the standpoint of Russia, how do they feel about the United States helping Ukraine to kill Russians? You can't really make this point without looking at the point of view of the opposition.
And not just the United States, 52 other nations of NATO and other nations in the so-called West are helping, not Ukraine. Ukrainians don't want to fight. That's why you have to have throw men like dogs to get them out of the car and just drag them through the street and throw them into the conscription offices uh, cars and then throw them to the front lines and held them in the conscription offices like in jail. There's bars, people cannot run away. They don't have cell phones. They get beat up. They get killed there because they don't want to fight. And They don't want to do that. They're not helping Ukraine. They're helping the Kiev regime to sustain itself because the Kiev regime is money laundering money for those countries and weapons, selling them out and making money. So the question is, the 52 countries that are helping the Kiev regime, not Ukrainians, the Kiev regime, what should be done to them? What they're pushing, not just giving technology to the Kiev regime, but provide that. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. There's like not hundreds, there's thousands of videos of that, and not just men are beaten, but their wives, their children who are trying to protect their husbands and fathers, they're being beaten by the conscription officers right in downtown Lviv, Lvov, Kiev, Dnipropetrovsk, everywhere around the country, and this is what's happening. And the question is, the countries that are supporting Ukraine, like the United States, giving intel, not just as a technology, which Iran did. As nobody should support anybody in a war. I'm against that too. But given technology, given uh, direct target hits within Russia, intel target hits, satellite imagery to the Kiev regime to target Russia, target their nuclear infrastructure, giving them missiles, and basically Ukraine cannot target those missiles on its own. Needs to use NATO's technology, United States technology, and their specialists to target Russia's infrastructure. That is the question. What is the West doing in this situation? I don't want Ukraine to fall. Ukraine already fell when this war started. That's what happened. Ukraine is done. Economically, there's no economy there. And even members of parliament in the Zelensky regime is saying the economy is destroyed. The economy is done. There's no sovereignty. There's no statehood in the country. More than 25% of its territory is lost. And as I said, 37 million out of 37, 35 million Ukrainians, less than 20, around 15 from my information, are left in the country. Can you imagine? More than half of the country is gone, left. And I can tell you, and Laura Loomer should know this, around 10 million Ukrainians fled to Russia, not to the West, but to Russia, because they believe it's safe there and nobody's touching them. They're not being conscripted and thrown to the front lines like Ukrainians are in Ukraine. They can leave their Russian territory freely. They have no problems at the border. They can travel free around the globe. And the country is totally destroyed without any population. And this is the reality of my country. Ukraine is done. It has to be a lot of restructuring done. And I believe so that today the West has to leave the Ukraine. If the West leaves Ukraine alone, this war will end, not with the destruction of the Ukraine, with a peace deal that will leave Ukraine a neutral state, at least what's left of the country, and we can continue on. The question is, if Ukraine conquers back Donbass, what is the reality of the people living in Donbass? Will they support Ukraine? No. Well, it's even if it will conquer back Crimea, will they support Ukraine? No. They voted to stay in Russia. They had a vote by the UN Charter. They had an internal vote to join in the those territories to join Russia. So what's going to happen is going to be a total disaster. You're going to have a next Holocaust within those regions because you're going to start killing people because they're Russian, and the Kiev regime will want to do that. So that's going to be the reality if Ukraine does, by any chance miracle, conquers back its 25% territory that it's lost. So
Let
we
me,
have to state the facts.
yeah,
Ukraine needs to be left alone by the West, and that's why I supported Trump. He
yeah.
promised to have Ukraine end the war within 24 hours. I didn't believe he's going to do it in 24 hours, but I at least believed that he's going to have the CIA, which has still 20 bases in Ukraine, will leave the country alone. He would stop financing the intel community to support the Kiev regime and have people like Laura Loomer not be there. That's what I want to
Well,
leave my
let me
country. If
take you
Laura
back.
Loomer wants to be there, show the truth.
Let
Go
me
to the
take you
truth.
back to
But she will
Laura
not do that.
Loomer. Let me take you back to Laura Loomer because she allowed a number of claims to be made on her substantial platform, including Zelensky saying there are no Nazis in Ukraine and there never were Nazis in Ukraine. Who is this, and what do you know about this guy?
Stepan Bandera, there's Shukhevich, there's Milnik. I'm going to go into detail on some of those guys. This is Stepan Bandera. He's a collaborator of the Nazi Germany who fought for with for Gestapo money. The Gestapo officially financed it to fight the Soviet army, to fight my grandfather, my great grandfather who fought in the Second World War, who went to Prague and liberated Prague from the Nazis. This guy fought him. And his people, who were financed by the Nazi Germany, by the Gestapo, to fight the Soviet army, who were allies with the United States and liberated Europe from Nazism. This is who are these people, and they're in Ukraine, not just because there's some group of neo Nazis running around, zigzagging around the country. No, it's an official level. They're being honored as heroes of the country. The streets within Ukraine, around the country, are being honored in his name. Bandera, Shukhevich, who's also a collaborator and working with Bandera. Bandera actually had a very good collaboration, not just with the Banderas, but also with his people. Then after he got killed, the Banderites, the UNUPA, which he coordinated, collaborated with the CIA after the World War II ended, and were financed with millions of dollars given to them and going after the Soviet army, and not just the Soviets, but the Poles, the Jews, the Romanians, anybody who the Nazis were against, they were supporting. That's what that movement was. And there's another point you should look up: Melnik. He's a collaborator of the Nazis. Also was the founder of OUN, who just got reburied in Ukraine. That's why this fuss is with Poland, with Ukraine, and the Nazism, because he got reburied. Melnik, his name is, and he got officially, with all the officialities, reburied with the Zelensky present, the Speaker of the Parliament present, the head of the presidential administration present during his burial, where his remains were transferred from Luxembourg to Ukraine. And he had official parade in his name, buried in official honorary grounds of the government of the country. Those people were killing Poles, Ukrainians, who were Soviet, Jews, with hundreds of thousands. These are those people, the streets in Ukraine are named after them. It's not just because it's on some group of 100 people running around the country, they're Nazis. No, there's patches of them worn on military uniforms in Ukraine. It's just crazy. We had the German ambassador. That's why we raided Azov in 2014, because we had the German ambassador tell us these are Nazis, destroy them before they take over the country. But we understood after we arrested all of them, we were told to release them because the security service Ukraine told us to release them because the CIA told them to release them. They're all being helped and coordinated within the intelligence community of the United States because that's what the CIA did. They financed Banderas, their movement against the Soviets after World War II, giving millions of dollars to them. And those are the facts if you go into archives and read official documents. So this is what it is. And Laura Loomer should know her history before going into a country like Ukraine and bragging and spreading lies and trying to promote what she's promoting: war. She's promoting not just Nazism and the destruction of people. She's promoting war and destruction of the country in total.
I agree with you, Andrei. It's shameful. I hope that Laura understands what she's doing.
She's going to call me probably a Russian agent because the Treasury is calling me. Let her do that. I don't care, because she's going against General Flynn. She's going against anybody who's actually telling her what she's doing wrong. We'll let her do that. I am proud that I stood out and supported the country, supported the United States with the truth at one point, which I believe the United States had some justice in it. I thought that's what I would do and get some justice for my country and the United States and stop what was happening in Ukraine before the war started, blocking the deep state from learning and destroying not just the United States, but my country, first of all. But let her go, and she's probably gonna, if she ever even brags about it. But they usually shadow ban me. That's how it works. They shadow ban me on Twitter. If I repost something, that doesn't get shown to any other posts. They shadow ban me on other social media, and they even shadow ban me on other platforms when I go out and talk about it because they're afraid of the truth. I can go against any one of them face to face and talk, and we'll see where the truth is, because I have truth on my side. I have nothing to hide. Nobody's paying me. Nobody paid me before.
You have evidence as well and firsthand
Of course,
experience,
I witnessed everything of this.
Yeah. Now it's a real disturbing situation. And, my concern is, as you said, Trump said he was going to end this war. I also doubted he would be able to do it in 24 hours. But, he speaks in exaggerated terms. I had hoped he would have done something. I mean, when he had Putin in Alaska, I had hoped that something was going to happen. That first meeting with Zelensky in the White House, in my opinion, Trump should have just said, listen, Zelensky, you're going to have an election in Ukraine in the next 90 days. The UN is going to monitor it, or whoever, I don't understand why people wouldn't compel that. Andrii, could you imagine if Donald Trump in November said, hey, the United States is at war with Iran, so I'm suspending the election and I'm just going to stay president? The entire world would be up in arms. Zelensky is allowed to fly around and he's treated like, I don't understand why Donald Trump even meets him at the White House. He should be condemned as a dictator.
Of course, a dictator who the country Ukraine is a jail. You cannot, the largest jail in the world. You cannot run away from it because people are being sent to the front lines against their own will. They don't want to fight. They understand this war is not because they're going to lose, which they also understand, or they lost, but because they understand this war is not for Ukraine. It was not like World War II where the Soviet was fighting for the Soviets and the Americans were fighting for the Americans against the Nazis. This war is Ukrainians are being used to fight this war for the deep state in Washington, the deep state in Brussels, and the deep state in London. And that's the reality. People are seeing that in Ukraine. They're afraid to speak out. They're afraid to go out. The real protests that are happening in Ukraine, when they come out on the street, they get arrested within a day. And those people are sent to the front lines, or in jail, or they already get killed. And people who speak the truth in Ukraine, like Gonzalo Lira, he got killed. Why did Laura Loomer didn't ask Zelensky about the U.S. citizen, a U.S. journalist,
That
her
was
colleague,
shameful.
who got tortured in Ukraine for speaking the truth? She did not ask about that too. Not even that question. So there's a lot that is happening right now. If you don't know what's happening in Ukraine, don't put your nose in it because you're going to get destroyed. Your reputation is going to get destroyed, and you're going to take not just wrong. There's no wrong side. There's the truth or there's not the truth. And if you're going to go in and just speak about propagandizing the regime, which everybody hates, not just within Ukraine, which is the most important of all, but around the globe, people are starting to understand you're not going to have good publicity at all. And I don't know if she wants to continue her work in the future, but people will remember this. People will remember this. It's happened. The same thing in supporting what the government of Israel is doing. So the same thing. You cannot support Holocaust and genocide around the world, which is happening right now, and then go away with your hands clean afterwards. No.
Let me ask you about this interview that Laura had with Marchenko. I don't know this person, but she's apparently a very well-known journalist in Ukraine. Did you see this?
Yeah, I saw bits of it also, and I know who this is. Marichka Padelko, she's a Sorosite for a long time, for a very long time, for the last 20 years. She's
Mm-hmm.
been supported and financed by the Soros groups in Ukraine. The same people who hate Trump. She's meeting and talking to the same people who hate President Donald Trump. She's promoting them. She's talking to them as the heroes, which is just total nonsense. Even within just in her own world, she's a friend of the president. How can you do that? Those people were undermining, working against President Donald Trump for years in Ukraine, supporting, lashing out on him in social media, in the news, and like Pavelko, she's a news anchor. She used to push narratives promoting that Trump was a Russian agent. And
Wow.
until recently, she did that. So, and Laura Loomer was talking to people like that, like even Zelensky, even in his interview, one of the bits that I saw was like, "Oh, if you would really get involved in U.S. politics, you would have the Democrats win." Oh,
Unbelievable.
that's every joke. There's partially some truth, right?
Yeah.
That's so he was spilling the beans there, and people didn't even notice that.
The other
The
thing that
media
Laura
around the globe just
mentioned
closed their eyes.
The other thing that Laura mentioned was that she was speaking to people at this Center for Countering Disinformation. Isn't this something that Nina Jankowicz was involved in at one point?
Yes, yes. The deep state of Washington that was promoting lies against Trump in Ukraine. When I spoke out the truth in Ukraine, one of which I personally witnessed their actions. They were spreading lies that I'm a Russian agent because I said that Ukraine interfered in U.S. elections, that the Democratic Party worked against the presidential candidate Donald Trump, lying about him, trying to disinform against him and his team, like General Flynn, Papadopoulos, Carter Page, and Paul Manafort. These are the people who were working behind the scenes with the help of the United States, promoting those lies against President Donald Trump, working together with the DNC. And it's just like, I don't know, it doesn't fit in a box. Person who's the friend of the president of the United States, Donald Trump, who actually had a hard time going through his political career because he was slandered falsely because of his position. They were afraid that he's going to come in and break their system apart and build a real America that people actually want to see, not just in America, but around the globe. People want to see America thrive. And I believe that, like, even people who don't like America, they don't want America to be destroyed because they understand the consequences of that. But these people were working against it, and she's meeting them and promoting them and seeing how good they are. So Trump needs to understand, what is Laura doing there, on what behalf of who's promoting her to do that. If she's really the president, the friend of the president, I believe she did not support Trump before. She has people around her that are supporting this war in Ukraine and pushing this narrative, and they showed their true face today.
Yeah. Yeah, it was very troubling, and I guess we'll see. I have a feeling Laura's going to ignore what both you and I say, but again, it's not a good development. I'm very concerned that, Trump might be influenced by some of this. I think they said he was sending Patriot missiles to Ukraine. That doesn't seem to help. It's a big problem.
I believe, I believe from latest information, he said he will not do that. He will not send Patriot missiles, 300 of them, which the United States needs. Let the United States deal with the United States problems. If the United States wants to be a mediator between Ukraine and Russia, it does not need to take a side. If it wants to be part
You're
of a
right.
side,
You're right. It says he's
then
backed away from that deal.
and yeah, and he said he will not give licenses to the Kiev regime to build those Patriot missiles because if he's going to give those licenses, they're going to be sold out to the black market, and you're going to have Patriot systems all over the globe within the cartels in Mexico used against the United States. So thank God, yeah, somebody told him to cool down on this and not push this. But unfortunately, at the same time, the Laura Loomer story is being pushed with the narrative around Zelensky's visit to Washington, which I think was a fiasco.
I
It was
agree.
behind closed doors, less than an hour. You can imagine talking less than an hour. Our conversation usually lasts longer than that. And you get, not without any press conference, alerted to the back alley door in the White House and then alerted back out. So you're like a puppet. Who's this guy? He's nobody. So at least there's some understanding happening there. But at the same time, Zelensky should be treated like a dictator and a person who took over power in Ukraine with the help of the West and basically is pushing this war to World War III scenario where if Russia stops at one point and says we will fight back the real enemy who is using Ukraine and has basically not just giving them technology, but using Ukrainians to fight war with Russia by supplying them and targeting our sites and hits a NATO country or United States, that's World War III. So let's pray that there's going to be cold minds and God will prevail around everybody not going that path. But as I said, it's going not in the right direction for my country. United States can end this, and actually can end it not 24 hours, but within a week or two. Stop financing the CIA, who's supporting the Kiev regime and advising Zelensky. Stop financing the targeting of the Russian territory by Ukrainian regime. Stop financing the Starlinks in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Ask for re-elections in Ukraine with having a neutral government come to power. For example, the parliament or the speaker, somebody from the members of parliament become a neutral speaker, not the guy who supports the Zelensky regime, can become a speaker for a couple of months, open borders for the Ukrainians to come back, stop the war, and have re-elections and supervision of the United Nations, Russia, United States, and then have all parties involved and have people not just who fled to the West be part of this election who can vote, but also people who fled to Russia who that can vote. The Ukrainians who are in Russia also, they're Ukrainians, have the possibility to vote, and then have opposition involved who can come in and vote on this, be part of the vote, and see who wins. Then there's going to be peace.
Yeah.
Otherwise, this is going to be a total disaster.
Yeah. I agree with you. You know, the other, just in closing, because I know it's getting late where you are, the other thing that I've been hearing a lot of from Laura and other people is this idea that, you know, this Ukrainian drone technology is now battle tested. And that's certainly true. You know, I think there's a lot of people in the deep state, the military industrial complex who realize that with an adversary like Russia, you know, the United States doesn't want mutually assured destruction and the total annihilation that a nuclear war would bring, but this type of proxy war where the United States funds various factions in Ukraine and drones are being used. I mean, this is certainly, in many respects, we could say that nuclear war is kind of a war of the 1950s, 60s, 70s. It's almost like an outdated technology in that it's either annihilation or nothing. With this type of drone warfare, there's these very targeted pinprick type strikes. And what Zelensky seems to be hinting is that they could have very, very long range drone precision strikes if they had internet connectivity going all the way from Kiev to Moscow. And so I think there are people within the United States military who want that technology, drone companies, joint US and Ukrainian companies that have developed technology over the last 4 or 5 years that now have an interest in selling that to the United States military. So I think that's another sinister motive for, you know, Laura and other people to try to make Trump and others in the United States support this effort of getting behind Ukraine and building Ukrainian drone factories in the United States. It's absolutely crazy if you ask me, Andre, but we'll see if Laura has anything to say about our conversation here. Is there anything more that you might want to say to her before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I just want to overall say that Ukraine is being used as a battlefield testing site, as you might have said. People
Oh, Andre.
want instead you give Ukraine equipment to test out that equipment on the battlefield. We saw how the Abrams tanks did not do a great job on the battlefield, not just because the drones, but because they're too heavy for Eastern European soil, and so they're not plausible to do their job. A great way to fight Russia if there's going to be ever a war between Russia and NATO. And the drone technology is the future of all this, and unfortunately, Ukraine is using this possibilities. The Kiev regime is using this to test out those possibilities on Ukrainian grounds, with Ukrainian men dying. And we're saying that people are dying on the front lines. The average lifespan of Ukrainian soldiers is 4 hours. 4 hours. More than 2 million Ukrainian soldiers dead, and that's the reality. And you can compare even the when they exchange bodies between Russian government and Ukrainian government. Russia gives back around a couple of thousand bodies. Ukraine gives back around 53, 54, 37. That's the proportion, the dead, compared to on the front lines, Russia and Ukraine. When Zelensky speaks to, there's only 50,000 Ukrainians dead. There's villages of people where there's 50,000 men before. There's no men. So there's just one. So that's total lies,
Yeah.
and that should stop. And about nuclear warfare, we should not forget. Yeah, there's total ballistic nuclear warfare where if you have used ballistic missiles, uh, but there's tactical nuclear warfare that can be still used and it'll be localized without total annihilation, and that's where we are afraid of, and that's where the brink of that usage between Russia and the West. And I hope that never happens. But the problem is that the West doesn't understand that there has to be things have to happen. Then I believe so that as a Slavic person and people who are very patient, usually the patient breaks and then things can go haywired. And that I hope that doesn't happen. Laura Loomer should understand that her job, if she would show the truth, that'd be one thing. And if she still has a chance, she can go out and show the real picture of what happened in Ukraine. Take the money, whatever you do from those oligarchs. They still have money from the people anyway. But show the real picture at the end and show what is the real situation in Kiev and around Kiev and the cities, not the guided by the Kiev regime, but what the real people are saying on the streets, how they get lured as dogs onto the buses, how they cannot cross the borders, even having children, 3 or more children, you can cross, but the border patrol office does not them. Do that picture, show that real truth in Ukraine. Then you can save your soul, maybe from the God who's going to decide what's going to happen to us next.
Well said, Andrii. I hope that will happen, but somehow I do not think that Laura is going to do that. So I want to encourage people to follow you on X. They can see what you have to say, Telizhenko Andy, and they can follow you. They can communicate with you. I want to thank you for joining me tonight, Andrii. Have a good evening, and thanks everybody